Pest and Predator Podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. Welcome to the Pest and Predator Podcast, brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. I'm your host, Sean Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com. Today on the Pest and Predator Podcast, we're going to talk about some survey results from a couple of research scientists with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. What are some of the pests that you're identifying in your fields? How are you trying to evaluate whether or not you should spray? How many of you are spraying? And what did this survey teach us about the awareness of beneficial insects? Today, our guest in the Pest and Predator Podcast are Dr. Haley Catton. She is a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada out of Lethbridge. As well, Dr. Emma Stevens, who is a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada based in Edmonton. Dr. Catton, welcome to the Pest and Predator Podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Stevens, it is great to have you join us here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, let's. This is in Pest and Predator Podcast. We've been having the most fascinating discussions. Today we're going to talk about a study, and you've got some great results to share with us here today. First of all, Dr. Stevens, what was the study about, and why did you do it?
Okay, great. This study is our work trying to quantify awareness of beneficial insects for Alberta field crop producers. We all know that beneficial insects are an important factor and component in pest management, but there's not very much empirical evidence on farmers' level of awareness of the beneficials working in their fields. And so we conducted a survey with 353 Alberta field crop producers to ask them exactly that. How much do they know about 7 species of beneficial insects? And does that knowledge influence their pest management decisions? And if so, how? So this is really filling in a big gap in our understanding of farmer even awareness of how beneficials operate and which ones are present in their fields and what they might contribute to their pest management. So we got some really good information about that question.
Yeah, and I've got a bunch of questions here related to the pests identified and spraying and things like that. But were we satisfied with the level of awareness of beneficials?
That's a complex question. I guess we tried to go into it with neutral expectations. We just really wanted to know as a baseline,
okay.
Because there's no prior information. What they do know, we found quite a bit of variation in awareness of particular species, and we can talk about that kind of in more detail. But some, like lady beetles, are maybe not surprisingly more well known. Others, like parasitoid wasps, which are also very important for pest management, are not nearly as well known amongst our field crop producers that we were able to survey. So there's room for sure to find tools to increase the level of knowledge, because we think that'll be an important tool for farmers in their pest management decisions.
Yeah, great to set that baseline so we know going forward when we do this again, are we improving or hopefully not losing awareness, but
that's right. I think it's great to know where we're starting from, and then we can track changes, and that's also very important for people who work in this field.
Okay, Dr. Catton, what were the top pests that farmers saw according to the survey?
Right. Yes. So even though our goal was to learn about beneficial insects, we think the way farmers think about those are in context of pests, right? They're usually managing for pests, and the beneficials are one pest management tool. So we needed to know about what pest farmers are seeing, and our responses, we've grouped them into 3 main commodity groups. So the cereals, canola, and peas and lentils. So we have 3 groups. And the main pest we saw that farmers reported seeing in wheat and barley, this is The whole survey, by the way, was for 2021 only. So it's 2021 growing season. Half of wheat producers in the province in our survey saw grasshoppers. So that was their main problem that year. Second most in cereals was wireworms. And then if we move to canola, flea beetles, 72% of canola growers saw flea beetles. So we kind of know this by talking to farmers, but it's really good to have hard numbers. In canola, ligas, half of farmers saw ligas in their fields, and grasshoppers was number 3 for canola at about 28%. Peas and lentils, grasshoppers were again number 1, and pea leaf weevil was number 2. And both of those were in the high 20%. So it was a really good idea to get an idea of what farmers were seeing in their fields, because that's going to frame the pest management decisions they would have made that year.
And all of those pests obviously creating a lot of damage to crop yields for sure. So how many farmers made the decision to spray those pests using something like economic thresholds?
Yeah, so we asked our farmers, if you saw an insect, did you spray for it? And did you use an economic threshold to make that decision? And we were really impressed with the number of farmers reporting using an economic threshold. So for grasshoppers and wheat, for example, 76% of farmers were using some kind of threshold to make that spray decision. And only 13% ended up spraying, right? So they're seeing the pest, they're scouting for it, and making a decision based on the numbers, which is really encouraging, right? Because I don't think anybody wants unnecessary pesticide use. There's lots of bad things that go along with that. So that was really impressive. So threshold use was in the high 70s, 80% for most pest and crop combinations. For flea beetles, it was 92% of people were using thresholds to make a spray decision. And flea beetles were the most sprayed pest in our survey. So 31% of farms that saw flea beetles ended up spraying, but 90% of those people that sprayed or did not use a threshold to make that decision.
Yeah.
So that was very encouraging. And for grasshoppers and pulses, it was 85% people using thresholds, and spray rate was pretty low at like 17%. So the threshold use percentages are high, 70s, 80s, 90s, which is awesome. And the spray percentage was a lot lower than that, right? In the teens or 20s or 30s sometimes.
Okay, so those are the numbers for how many used an economic threshold to make the decision. How many actually sprayed?
Right. So the 70s, 80s, 90s% are the ones who use an economic threshold. The numbers I talked about in the teens and 20s and 30% are the ones who actually sprayed.
Okay.
Right. So threshold use was way, way more common than spraying, which is what you want, right? We want scouting and informed decisions, and spray when necessary, absolutely. But many times the scouting showed that the spraying was not necessary, which is great.
Any indication on which products are most commonly used, even down to say like the group level? Was there anything on that?
Yes, we did ask that as well. And in all 3 commodity groups, cereals, canola, and pulses, our number 1 was synthetic pyrethroids. So say in wheat and barley, not that many people sprayed. But if they did spray, 60% used synthetic pyrethroids. And in canola, not that many sprayed, but if they did, 80% were using synthetic pyrethroids. So that seems to be the number 1 choice for farmers when they do decide that they need to spray. Group 3.
Okay, that's group 3. Okay. Did the data group the farmer did you put them together at all in any way according to some of their strategies in the field to manage the pests?
Yes, we had, because we asked about not just beneficials, but all of the data that Dr. Catton was just talking about in terms of their overall pest management approaches. We were able to use cluster analysis, and we're still kind of working on that analysis, but to try to look at pest management strategies as a group and to see if there are, I guess, portfolios of strategies that kind of go together and approaches that people are taking. And we did find it seemed like there are probably two main groups of strategies that go together. So when we're working on that analysis, we're looking at the economic thresholds, for example, that we were just talking about. But we also asked about information sources, like do folks rely on independent crop advisors, for example, for pest management information, scouting as a decision tool, kind of how much autonomy people like to have in making their pest management decisions. So they make the final decision, or they kind of work collectively with an advisor. But then we also asked directly about, or looked at the influence of beneficial insects in their pest management strategies. We have some data on that as well. So we included that in the kind of group of portfolios. So as well as some environmental management strategies like reducing pesticide use just directly as a strategy that they employ, or leaving shelter belts, leaving areas of their farm. When we kind of took those actions collectively, we found that the beneficial insects in particular seems to be a set of strategies that one group is kind of using more than another. They're more influenced by beneficial insects in their pest management, and that seems to go along with some of the other strategies that might be expected, like leaving shelter belts unsprayed, or just maybe doing more scouting, for example. So, and then there's a second group that is not as influenced by beneficials and is, but is still using thresholds. So the beneficials actually seems to kind of be a breaking point in the groupings, which was kind of interesting to us. So we're still pursuing that to try to understand it better.
And you sort of mentioned this, Dr. Stevens, a little bit, but were there any important or were there any trends when it comes to where people are getting the information regarding what to do with pest management?
Oh yes, that's been another really interesting component of the data. We asked about all the information sources, and then we also asked how frequently they consult those sources. And from the data that we have, the Blue Book is the number one source in terms of being always accessed or usually accessed. We sort of had a ranking between always and never. And then second to that are local crop input retailers. And so those are very important sources of information as well. And then independent advisors, and also neighbors and other farmers. So it kind of descends from there, but we think that is a really important finding. And Haley, I don't know if you want to talk about the Blue Book, but we've been able to communicate some of those results to the next round of the Blue Book, so that we can let them know that this is an important information source for people in our survey.
Yeah, Haley, you want to hit on that?
Right. Yeah, so in the 2024 Blue Book, there's a new section now on beneficial insects. So the Blue Book being the top number one sourced or information source for farmers, no matter how they manage their pests. We thought, wow, this is a source that could hit all audiences, but there's nothing in there about beneficials other than bees and pollinators, right? But there's all these other beneficials like ladybugs and parasitoid wasps. So we approached the Blue Book Committee and wrote them a proposal to include a small section. And yes, it's in there. We even have a little shout out on the cover of the 2024 Alberta Blue Book. And we just have a short section in there meant to raise awareness of like, hey, there's a whole other group of non-target insects here to consider as part of pest management. And there's links for more sources of information in the 2024 Blue Book in Alberta now. So we're really happy with that. We feel like we could reach a lot of people with this new section.
That's pretty cool. Dr. Stevens, I guess to round this out, and we've been talking about, pests we're trying to manage, and we've also got the beneficial side of this equation too. Those they're working for you for free, as we like to say. what did we learn from this study about beneficial insects?
I think the data we've collected about the different species of beneficials is really unique. So we asked about lady beetles, spiders, parasitoid wasps, ground beetles, lacewings, predatory mites, and therivids. So quite a detailed set of questions on relative knowledge of all of those species and just awareness of them in and of themselves, and also how they might operate. We learned that there's quite a bit of variation. People don't know maybe as much as we might want them to know about all of these different species and how they operate. So I think the way to think about it is that, yes, this is our baseline, and we can see that there's room to find ways to increase awareness of all of these different species. Lady beetles are the best known from a sort of a ranking of 1 to 5. People would say they know quite a bit about lady beetles and how they function, but for all these other important species, the awareness level is lower. So that was we didn't have anything to compare this information to. So we just we're glad we're able to provide some insight on ways to increase awareness.
Yeah, that's what the Pest and Predator Podcast is all about, right? Trying to bring that information and increase awareness, and so that's what we're trying to do here with all these episodes. And it has been so much fun to be hosting this podcast for a number of years. Dr. Catton?
Yeah, can I just add a little bit onto the beneficials program? So I think that we have major areas of potential to increase awareness for parasitoid wasps, because they are really not well known according to our data, at least in Alberta. And they are very hard to see in the field. So if someone doesn't have a trained eye, they'll never know they're there. But they can have huge effects on populations, like the cereal leaf beetle parasitoid T. Julis that you and I have talked before about, Sean. It can be killing 90% of your cereal leaf beetles in the field, but invisibly, So that's one area of huge potential for increased awareness. And the other is ground beetles. So ground beetles are visible, right? Farmers can see them. But there's potential to increase awareness that those are good beetles. So I almost like pests that you can see and beneficials you can see and don't see can both benefit from increased awareness. And we think this project can help guide future efforts for Field Heroes, right? The Awesome Awareness campaign, right? Where are their biggest potentials? Who should they talk to? And what beneficials could they focus on? So we see this as very, very complementary to Field Heroes, and really happy with this information that we've gathered so far.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for the both of you for joining us here on the Pest and Predator Podcast. Dr. Stevens, thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been great.
And Dr. Catton, it's great to chat with you again.
Yeah, thanks a bunch.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Pest and Predator Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pest and Predator Podcast. It's brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm.